Mrs. Castellano, your mortgage payment is 3 months overdue. The bank representative's voice cut through the phone like a knife as I stood frozen in the marble foyer of what I thought was our dream home in Willowbrook Heights. We've sent multiple notices to your Rosewood Drive address, and frankly, we're concerned about the property going into foreclosure. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. My hands trembled as I gripped the mahogany banister, staring at the crystal chandelier Marcus had insisted we install last spring. 3 months behind on the mortgage? That was impossible. I managed all our finances meticulously, transferring money from our joint accounts to cover every bill, every expense, every luxury Marcus claimed we needed to maintain our lifestyle. There must be some mistake, I whispered, my voice barely audible in the echo of our 2-story entryway. I've been making regular transfers to cover the mortgage. My husband Marcus handles the actual payments, but I've been funding the account consistently. Ma'am, our records show the account designated for mortgage payments has been consistently drained each month, sometimes within days of your deposits. Are you aware of other withdrawals your husband might be making? The words hit me like a physical blow. Other withdrawals. I sank onto the velvet bench beneath our family portrait, the one we'd commissioned last Christmas, showing Marcus, myself, and our 2 teenage children, Isabella and Cameron, smiling in front of this very house. The house we'd purchased 5 years ago when Marcus's architecture firm finally took off, when everything seemed perfect. What kind of withdrawals? I managed to ask, though I dreaded the answer. Large cash withdrawals, wire transfers to various accounts, and significant charges at high-end establishments. Restaurants, hotels, jewelry stores. The pattern suggests someone with expensive tastes who isn't concerned about mortgage obligations. My mind raced back to the past 6 months. Marcus's late nights at the office, his sudden interest in fitness and designer clothes, the mysterious phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. The new cologne, the unexplained charges on our credit card that he'd dismissed as client entertainment expenses. And then there was her, Vivien Dubois. I'd seen her at Marcus's firm holiday party last December, a stunning 28-year-old interior designer with platinum blonde hair and a laugh that carried across crowded rooms. She'd been hired to redesign their office spaces, Marcus had explained. Someone with fresh perspectives and innovative ideas. The way his eyes had lingered on her, the way he'd introduced her to everyone while barely acknowledging my presence, should have been warning enough. Mrs. Castellano, are you still there? Yes, I replied, my voice steadier now as a cold clarity began settling over me. Can you tell me exactly how much has been withdrawn from the mortgage account in the past 3 months? $47,000 in total. The mortgage payment is only $3,200 monthly, so you can see the discrepancy. $47,000. I closed my eyes, calculating rapidly. That was nearly enough for a luxury vacation, expensive jewelry, perhaps even a down payment on another property. My analytical mind, honed by years as a forensic accountant before I'd stepped back to raise Isabella and Cameron, began connecting patterns I'd been too trusting to see. The weekend trips Marcus claimed were architecture conferences in neighboring cities. The new Cartier watch, he said, was a gift from a grateful client. The expensive wine deliveries that arrived when I wasn't home. The restaurant charges from establishments in downtown Millbrook, 30 miles from his office, during hours, when he claimed to be working late. There's something else you should know, the bank representative continued, his tone becoming more sympathetic. The property deed shows some interesting details that you might want to review. Are you familiar with exactly how the ownership is structured? What do you mean? I asked, though something in his tone suggested this might be important. Well, it's unusual, but the property is listed under a single name only, not joint ownership as we typically see with married couples. You might want to check your copy of the deed. I stood up abruptly, my mind racing. The deed. When we'd purchased this house 5 years ago, I'd been so overwhelmed with managing the down payment transfer, money that had come entirely from my inheritance after my grandmother's passing, that I'd let Marcus handle most of the paperwork. He was the architect, after all, more familiar with property documents and legal language. But now, a memory surfaced. A conversation with our attorney, James Whitfield, during the closing process. He'd asked specifically about the ownership structure, mentioned something about the benefits of single-name ownership for certain financial protections. I'd been distracted, dealing with Cameron's school enrollment and Isabella's piano recital preparations, trusting Marcus to make the decision that was best for our family. "I need to review those documents," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Can you tell me whose name is on the deed?" I'm not supposed to discuss ownership details over the phone, but given the circumstances, Mrs. Castellano, the property at 847 Rosewood Drive is titled solely in your name. Elena Castellano, your husband has no legal ownership stake in the property. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My name only. While Marcus had been draining our mortgage account to fund his affair with Vivien, while he'd been treating our home as his personal ATM to finance his betrayal, the house itself, our most valuable asset worth over $800,000, belonged entirely to me. I looked around the foyer with new eyes. The imported marble floors, the custom millwork, the art collection we'd assembled together, it was all mine. Every beautiful detail of the home Marcus was risking to foreclosure for his girlfriend was legally mine alone. Mrs. Castellano will need to discuss a payment plan to bring the mortgage current. But given your ownership status and the unauthorized use of designated funds, you may have legal recourse against whoever has been misappropriating the mortgage money. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months of suspicion and doubt. Power. Marcus thought he was playing me for a fool, thought he could drain our accounts to wine and dine his young girlfriend while I remained obliviously managing our household. What he didn't realize was that the very house he was jeopardizing, the symbol of our success that he was so carelessly risking, could never be taken from me. And I was about to make sure he understood exactly what that meant. Before I dive deeper into how I discovered the full extent of Marcus's betrayal and what I did about it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever had someone take advantage of your trust in the worst possible way, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will show you exactly how preparation and smart thinking can turn the tables on anyone who tries to betray you. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. That evening, as I sat in our home office surrounded by 5 years of financial records, the full scope of what Marcus had built with my money became crystal clear. This wasn't just a house. It was a monument to 15 years of marriage, 18 years together total, and a lifetime of careful financial planning that I had orchestrated from behind the scenes. Before we dive deeper into how I uncovered Marcus's elaborate deception, I need to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? And if you've ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was living a double life with your money, hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to reveal will shock you to your core. Let me take you back to how we got here, because understanding the foundation makes what Marcus tried to steal even more infuriating. When Marcus and I first met at Riverside University 19 years ago, I was a mathematics major with a minor in economics, already planning my career in forensic accounting. Marcus was studying architecture, charming and ambitious, with dreams of designing luxury homes for wealthy clients. We were both driven, both hungry for success, but in very different ways. I was methodical, analytical, someone who planned every financial move 3 steps ahead. Marcus was creative, visionary, but completely hopeless with money management. Even in college, I was the one who balanced his checkbook, made sure his Student loans were paid on time, helped him budget for his expensive architecture supplies and software. After graduation, while Marcus struggled to establish himself at various architectural firms around Millbrook County, I built a reputation as one of the region's most thorough forensic accountants. I specialized in uncovering financial fraud for law firms and insurance companies, ironic considering what I was about to discover in my own home. By the time Isabella was born 12 years ago, I was earning significantly more than Marcus. When Cameron came along 2 years later, we made the decision that I would scale back my practice to focus on raising our children, while Marcus continued building his architecture career. It seemed logical. His income was growing, and someone needed to be present for the kids. What Marcus never fully grasped, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that even while working part-time, I remained our family's true financial architect. Every major purchase, every investment, every financial decision flowed through my analytical mind first. I researched mortgage rates, compared insurance policies, negotiated with contractors, and managed our investment portfolio. The house on Rosewood Drive wasn't just Marcus's dream. It was my carefully calculated plan executed perfectly. When my grandmother Rosalie passed away 4 years ago, she left me an inheritance of $340,000. That money, combined with our savings that I had meticulously accumulated over 8 years of marriage, provided the down payment for our dream home. Marcus found the property through his network, but I was the one who analyzed the market, confirmed the investment potential, and structured the financing. I remembered now the conversation with our attorney James Whitfield during the closing process. He had recommended putting the property solely in my name for several strategic reasons. It protected the asset from any potential business liabilities Marcus might face as an architect, it preserved my inheritance rights, and it provided certain tax advantages given my status as the primary income earner at the time. "Are you sure about this structure?" James had asked Marcus directly. "Elena will have complete ownership rights, which means she's the financial genius in this family," Marcus had interrupted with a laugh, signing the papers without hesitation. "I trust her judgment completely. Besides, what's mine is hers. And what's hers is mine, right?" How naive those words seemed now. Over the past 5 years in this house, I had continued managing every aspect of our financial life. I set up the automatic transfers for the mortgage, scheduled the insurance payments, maintained our investment accounts, and even handled the property taxes. Marcus focused on his architectural projects while I ensured our foundation remained solid. But somewhere in the past year, Marcus had started viewing our carefully constructed financial system as his personal playground. The joint accounts I had established for household expenses became his funding source for an increasingly expensive lifestyle that I now realized had nothing to do with our family. As I sat there surrounded by bank statements and credit card bills, one particular document caught my attention. A credit card statement from last month showing a $3,400 charge at Bellecourt Jewelry, an exclusive boutique in downtown Millbrook. The same day, there was a restaurant charge for $680 at Le Bernardin, a French restaurant I'd never heard of, let alone visited. Isabella had been at soccer practice that evening. Cameron was at his friend's house. I was home preparing for a client presentation. And Marcus had claimed he was working late on the Riverside Mall renovation project. The pieces of his double life were beginning to form a picture I could no longer ignore. But what Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly anticipated, was that his betrayal was about to collide with the very thing that could destroy him. My expertise in uncovering financial fraud and the ironclad legal protection I had unknowingly put in place 5 years ago. The house he was risking with his reckless spending, the home he was treating as collateral for his affair, belonged entirely to me, and I was about to make sure he understood exactly what that meant for his future. Tomorrow's revelation would change everything, but tonight, I had planning to do. The next morning, I woke up to find Marcus already gone. His side of the bed was Cold, suggesting he'd left early and there was no note, something that would have been unthinkable just 6 months ago. I checked my phone. 6:47 a.m. His architecture firm didn't open until 8:30, so where exactly was he rushing off to? I made coffee in our gleaming kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd hosted dozens of dinner parties, where our children had done homework at the Marble Island, where Marcus had once promised me we'd grow old together in this house. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now planning his downfall in the very space he'd helped design. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Good morning, beautiful. Can't wait for our weekend in Napa Valley. The suite at Auberge du Soleil is confirmed. M." I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands. The text had clearly been meant for someone else. Someone who wasn't his wife of 15 years. Someone who didn't know that M was supposed to be spending this weekend helping Cameron with his science project and attending Isabella's volleyball tournament. But what made my blood run cold wasn't just the obvious affair confirmation. It was the financial implications. Auberge du Soleil was one of the most expensive resorts in Napa Valley. A weekend there, with their premium suites, could easily cost $4,000 or more. Money that should have been going to our mortgage, our children's college funds, our family's future. I screenshot the message and immediately called Marcus's office, knowing he wouldn't be there yet but wanting to test something. Castellano Architecture. "This is Jennifer," his receptionist answered cheerfully. "Hi, Jennifer, it's Elena. Is Marcus in yet?" "Oh, hi, Mrs. Castellano." "No, he won't be in until this afternoon. He's at the Westbrook commercial site doing final inspections. Big day. They're hoping to close that project by Friday." I thanked her and hung up, my suspicions confirmed. Marcus was lying to everyone. His office, his family, probably even Vivien about various aspects of his life. The Westbrook commercial project had been completed 3 weeks ago. I knew because I'd helped him celebrate the successful completion with a dinner at home. Determined to understand the full scope of his deception, I drove to our bank in downtown Willowbrook Heights. Patricia Morrison, our personal banker for the past 8 years, greeted me with concern. "Elena, I'm so glad you came in. We've been trying to reach Marcus about some unusual account activity, but he hasn't returned our calls." She led me to her private office and pulled up our accounts on her computer. What I saw on the screen made my stomach drop. In the past 6 months alone, there had been over $73,000 in withdrawals from our joint accounts. Money I had been regularly depositing from my part-time forensic accounting work and our investment dividends. "Look at this pattern," Patricia said, pointing to the screen. "Regular cash withdrawals of $2,000 to $3,000, always on Fridays. Wire transfers to something called VD Designs LLC totaling $18,000. And these credit card payments, when did you both start shopping so extensively at luxury retailers?" VD Designs LLC. Vivien Dubois. The interior designer wasn't just Marcus's affair partner. She was also profiting financially from our relationship. He was essentially paying her for services that went far beyond professional interior design. "Patricia, I need you to show me something. Can you pull up the history of our mortgage account specifically?" Her expression grew grave as she navigated to another screen. "Elena, I have to ask, are you aware that Marcus has been transferring the mortgage money to other accounts before the automatic payment processes?" "What do you mean?" "Each month, you transfer $3,200 for the mortgage payment, but within 24 to 48 hours, Marcus moves that money out again. Sometimes to the joint checking account, sometimes to accounts I don't have visibility into. The mortgage. Payment then gets declined for insufficient funds." My forensic accounting training kicked into high gear. This wasn't just infidelity or even simple financial irresponsibility. This was systematic financial manipulation designed to maintain his lifestyle while destroying our family's security. Marcus was essentially using our mortgage account as a personal checking account while letting our home slide toward foreclosure. "How long has this been happening?" Based on what I can see here, about 4 months consistently. But there were sporadic incidents going back 8 months. 8 months. That aligned perfectly with when Marcus first mentioned hiring Vivien for the office redesign project. Their affair hadn't just been personal, it had been systematically financed by my hard work and careful financial planning. I left the bank with printed statements and a growing sense of cold determination. Marcus wasn't just cheating on me, he was stealing from our children's future, jeopardizing our home, and funding his girlfriend's business ventures with money that belonged to our family. But his most critical mistake was one he didn't even realize he'd made. That afternoon, I drove to the courthouse in downtown Millbrook County and requested a copy of our property deed. The clerk, a kind woman named Dorothy, helped me locate the document in their record system. "Here it is," she said, printing out the official copy. 847 Rosewood Drive, purchased 5 years ago. Sole ownership listed under Elena Maria Castellano. I stared at the document, seeing it with new clarity. Not only was my name the only one on the deed, but the property had been purchased with my inheritance money and legally structured to protect it from any debts or liabilities Marcus might incur through his business. When James Whitfield had recommended this ownership structure, he'd been thinking about protecting our family assets from potential architectural malpractice claims or business failures. What he'd unknowingly done was protect our most valuable asset from Marcus's personal financial disasters. As I sat in my car outside the courthouse, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, honey," he said, his voice artificially bright. "Just wanted to let you know I'll be working late again tonight. The Henderson project is demanding some last-minute revisions." "That's interesting," I replied calmly. "I just spoke with Jennifer this morning, and she mentioned you were at the Westbrook site." A pause. "Oh, right. Both projects, actually. Running between sites today. You know how it is." "I do know how it is, Marcus. I also know about Napa Valley. This weekend." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Elena, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. But first, I think you should know that I spent the morning at the bank with Patricia, reviewing our accounts. All of them. Look, honey, if this is about money, I can fix this. The Henderson project is going to bring in a significant bonus. And—" "Marcus," I interrupted, my voice steady and cold. "The Henderson project was completed 2 months ago. I know because I helped you deposit the final payment." Another long silence. "We need to talk," he said finally, his tone completely changed from artificial brightness to something approaching fear. "Yes, we do, but not tonight. Tonight I have some research to do. And Marcus, don't bother coming home late. I'll know exactly where you are." As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months of suspicion and growing dread. Control. Marcus thought he'd been clever, thought he could manipulate our finances and our relationship, while I remained obliviously focused on managing our household. What he was about to discover was that you don't try to financially defraud a forensic accountant, especially one who legally owns the roof over your head. The weekend in Napa Valley he'd planned with Vivien was going to become very expensive in ways he never anticipated. But first, I had one more stop to make, and one more piece of evidence to gather that would change everything. My final stop that day was a place Marcus had never even known existed: the safety deposit box. I'd maintained at Millbrook Trust and Savings since before our marriage. As I turned the key in box 847, the same number as our house address, a detail I'd chosen deliberately, I smiled at my younger self's paranoia that was about to become my salvation. Inside the metal box lay 18 years of careful documentation that told a story Marcus had never bothered to learn. My father, Vincent Torino, had been a small business owner who lost everything in the 1990s recession because he'd trusted the wrong partner with access to his company's finances. He'd spent my teenage years drilling one lesson into my head. "Elena, never give anyone complete control over your financial life. always have a backup plan they don't know about. What Marcus didn't realize, what he couldn't have possibly known, was that every major financial decision we'd made as a couple had been protected by layers of legal documentation that I'd quietly assembled over the years. Not because I didn't trust him, but because my father's voice in my head had never let me be completely vulnerable to anyone else's choices. I pulled out the thick manila folder labeled Property Protection Documents and spread its contents across the small table in the vault room. The paperwork told a story of foresight that even I had forgotten in the comfortable routine of our marriage. First was the premarital trust I'd established when Marcus and I got engaged. My inheritance from my grandmother's estate hadn't just been placed in our joint accounts. It had been structured through something called the Torino Family Asset Protection Trust, with me as the sole beneficiary and my sister Francesca as the backup trustee. Every dollar of the down payment for our house had flowed through this trust, creating an unbreakable paper trail that separated my family money from any marital assets. Then there was the real estate purchase agreement that showed the full truth about our home buying process. While Marcus had found the property and handled the architectural aspects, I had personally negotiated every financial detail. The seller, Catherine Meridian, had actually offered a better deal for cash buyers, so I'd structured the purchase to take advantage of that discount, but only if the property remained in single-name ownership to qualify for her estate tax benefits. The mortgage documents revealed another layer of protection I'd built in. Our attorney, James Whitfield, hadn't just recommended single-name ownership for liability protection. He'd structured it specifically to take advantage of my excellent credit score and my status as a certified forensic accountant, which qualified us for preferential lending rates. Marcus's credit had some issues from his early business ventures, so putting everything in my name had saved us nearly $300,000 in interest over the life of the loan. But the document that made me smile was one I'd completely forgotten about. A comprehensive insurance policy I'd purchased through my professional association that protected against spousal financial fraud and asset misappropriation. As a forensic accountant who'd seen countless cases of financial betrayal, I'd bought the policy almost as a joke, thinking I'd never need it. The premium was only $200 annually, and it covered up to $500,000 in financial losses caused by a spouse's fraudulent activity. Marcus had signed dozens of documents during our marriage without reading them carefully: loan applications, insurance, policies, investment account agreements. What he'd unknowingly signed 5 years ago was a limited power of attorney that allowed him to handle routine financial transactions, but specifically excluded him from making any decisions about the property or my protected trust assets. I photographed each document with my phone and stored the originals back in the safety deposit box. Then I made one more stop: the office of Francesca's friend, Detective Maria Santos with the Millbrook County Financial Crimes Unit. Maria and I had met at Francesca's wedding 3 years ago, and we'd stayed in touch because our professional paths occasionally crossed. When forensic accountants uncovered evidence of financial crimes, we often worked with detectives like Maria to build prosecution cases. "Elena," Maria greeted me with surprise as I entered her office at the county government building. "This is unexpected. What brings you to see me?" "I need some professional advice, but not in my usual capacity," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I think my husband might be committing financial fraud against our family." Maria's expression shifted to serious attention as I laid out the evidence I'd gathered. The systematic mortgage account manipulation, the wire transfers to Vivien's business, the pattern of cash withdrawals that aligned with his affair timeline, and the discovery that our home was heading toward foreclosure despite my consistent funding. "This is textbook spousal financial abuse," Maria said after reviewing my documentation. "But Elena, you're in a uniquely strong position here. Most victims of this type of fraud don't have your professional background or the kind of legal protections you've maintained." "What do you mean?" "Well, first, you've documented everything meticulously. better than most of my investigators would do. Second, you have clear ownership of the primary asset he's jeopardizing. And third, your insurance policy against spousal fraud means you have both criminal and civil remedies available. Maria explained that Marcus's actions potentially constituted several felonies, mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and theft by deception. The wire transfers to Vivien's business, if they could prove she knew the money was being diverted from mortgage payments, might also constitute conspiracy to commit fraud. But here's what makes your case unusual, Maria continued. Most financial fraud victims are left powerless because their spouse had legal access to joint assets. Marcus never had legal access to your protected assets, which means every dollar he diverted was essentially theft from accounts he was only authorized to use for specific purposes. So what you're telling me is that my paranoid preparation actually worked. Elena, your paranoid preparation created one of the most bulletproof asset protection structures I've ever seen in a marriage. Your husband thought he was stealing from joint accounts, but he was actually stealing from a protected trust while jeopardizing property he has no legal claim to. As I drove home that evening, I felt a strange combination of sadness and empowerment. The marriage I'd believed in was clearly over. Marcus had made that choice when he decided to fund his affair with our family's future. But the financial security I'd worked so hard to build, the foundation I'd laid for our children's futures, remained completely intact. Marcus's Napa Valley weekend with Vivien was going to be very expensive, but not in the way he thought. While he was spending what he believed was our money on his girlfriend, I was going to be implementing a plan that would demonstrate the difference between having access to someone's money and actually owning it. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." I smiled and typed back, "Take your time. I have a busy evening planned too." What I didn't tell him was that my busy evening involved a three-way conference call with James Whitfield, Maria Santos, and the claims representative from my spousal fraud insurance policy. By the time Marcus returned from his romantic weekend, I would have activated every legal protection I'd spent 18 years carefully constructing, and he was about to discover that stealing from a forensic accountant who owns the house you're living in is not a sustainable strategy. Before I reveal exactly what happened when Marcus came home from his weekend with Vivien, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever discovered that your careful planning saved you from someone else's betrayal? Hit that like button if you think Marcus is about to get exactly what he deserves, and make sure you're subscribed because the confrontation that's coming will change everything. The three-way conference call that Friday evening revealed layers of Marcus's deception that even my trained forensic accounting eye had missed. James Whitfield, our family attorney, had been quietly documenting irregularities in Marcus's financial behavior for months, waiting for the right moment to bring them to my attention. "Elena, I've been hoping you'd call," James said as soon as Maria Santos and I were connected to the call. "I've received several concerning inquiries about your property and Marcus's authority to make decisions regarding it." My stomach tightened. "What kind of inquiries?" 3 weeks ago, Marcus contacted my office asking about the process for adding a second mortgage to the Rosewood Drive property. He claimed you were both interested in leveraging the equity for a business expansion opportunity. I nearly dropped the phone. "James, I never discussed any second mortgage with Marcus. And what business expansion?" "That's exactly why I didn't proceed," James replied. When I asked to schedule a meeting with both of you to discuss the details, Marcus became evasive and eventually stopped returning my calls. Maria Santos interjected, "This suggests premeditation for a much larger financial scheme than simple affair spending. Elena, Marcus wasn't just stealing from your current accounts. He was planning to steal against your property equity." The magnitude of what Marcus had been planning hit me like a physical blow. Our home was worth approximately $800,000, and we had only $340,000 remaining on the mortgage. That meant there was $460,000 in equity that Marcus had been trying to access. Money that could have funded his affair and Vivien's business ventures. For years while leaving our family drowning in debt. There's more, James continued grimly. Marcus also inquired about the legal process for transferring property ownership between spouses. He specifically asked about scenarios where one spouse might need to take control due to the other spouse's diminished capacity. Diminished capacity? I repeated, my voice rising. What exactly did he mean by that? He suggested you'd been experiencing memory issues and difficulties managing complex financial decisions. He painted a picture of someone who might not be competent to maintain sole ownership of such a valuable asset. The room spun around me as I processed this information. Marcus hadn't just been stealing our money and cheating with Vivien, he'd been laying groundwork to declare me mentally incompetent so he could take control of the house. In his mind, I was apparently just an obstacle to accessing the equity he needed to fund his new life. James, please tell me you have documentation of these conversations. Every email, every voicemail, every meeting request. As your attorney, I was legally obligated to protect your interests, which meant documenting any attempt by Marcus to circumvent the ownership structure we'd carefully established. Maria took notes as James detailed the timeline. Marcus's first inquiry about the second mortgage had occurred 6 weeks ago, right around the time Vivien's business expenses on our accounts had dramatically increased. His questions about my mental competency had begun 4 weeks ago, coinciding with when I'd started asking more questions about our finances. Elena, this pattern suggests Marcus has been planning this financial takeover for at least 2 months, Maria explained. The affair spending was just the beginning. His endgame was apparently to gain control of your property, extract the equity, and possibly even have you declared incompetent to prevent you from interfering. I felt a cold anger settling over me, different from the hurt and betrayal I'd experienced earlier in the week. This wasn't just infidelity or even typical financial fraud. This was a calculated attempt to steal my family's security while destroying my reputation and autonomy. What's our next step? I asked, my voice steady, despite the fury building inside me. James responded first. I'm filing an emergency petition on Monday morning to place additional protections on the property. Given Marcus's inquiries and the evidence of financial manipulation, we can get a court order preventing any mortgage modifications or ownership transfers without both parties present and additional psychological evaluation. And from a criminal perspective, Maria added, we now have evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted financial elder abuse through false competency claims, and systematic theft. The wire transfers to Vivien's business combined with his attempts to access property equity suggest this is organized criminal activity, not just marital problems. Elder abuse? I'm only 41. Financial abuse through false competency claims applies to any adult, regardless of age, Maria explained. Marcus was essentially trying to have you declared mentally incompetent to steal your assets. That's a serious felony. The insurance representative, Sandra Chen from Allied Professional Protection, had been quietly taking notes throughout our conversation. Mrs. Castellano, based on what I'm hearing, your claim falls under our maximum coverage tier. The systematic nature of the fraud, the attempted property manipulation, and the false competency angle means you're eligible for our full $500,000 protection plus legal fee coverage. What does that mean practically? It means you have unlimited legal resources to fight this, and any financial losses you incur will be fully covered while we pursue recovery from the perpetrators. Marcus and potentially Vivien could be held liable not just for what they've stolen, but for punitive damages as well. As the call ended, I sat in my home office, the same space where Marcus had been secretly planning to declare me incompetent, and felt a strange sense of clarity. The man I'd married, the father of my children, had been systematically planning to destroy my life for months while pretending to be a loving husband. But what Marcus had fundamentally misunderstood was the difference between having access to someone's life and actually understanding how that life was structured. He'd seen my careful financial management as weakness, my trust as naivety, and my legal protections as mere paperwork. My phone buzzed with a photo message from Marcus, a sunset view from what was clearly an expensive resort terrace with 2 wine glasses and the caption, "Celebrating successful project completion with the team." I screenshot the image and forwarded it to Maria Santos with a timestamp note. Marcus was literally documenting his fraud while committing it, too arrogant to realize that his wife was a professional fraud investigator. I spent the rest of the evening preparing what I privately called the Marcus File, a comprehensive documentation of every financial irregularity, every lie, every attempt to manipulate our legal structure. By Sunday night, when he returned from his weekend with Vivien, I would have 127 pages of evidence ready for both criminal prosecutors and civil attorneys. But first, I had one more conversation to have, with Isabella and Cameron. They deserved to know what was happening to our family, and more importantly, they needed to understand that their college funds, their future security, and their home were completely protected from their father's choices. Saturday morning, I sat both kids down in our family room, the same room where we'd celebrated Marcus's business successes, where we'd planned family vacations, where Marcus had told us countless stories about his demanding clients and complex projects. "Mom, you look really serious," Isabella observed, her volleyball trophies lining the mantel behind her, reminding me of all the family events Marcus had been missing lately. "I am serious, sweetheart. Your father and I are having some problems, and I need you both to understand what's happening and what it means for our family." Cameron, always the analytical one like his mother, leaned forward. "Is Dad in trouble? Some kids at school have been saying stuff about police cars in our neighborhood." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Your father has been making some very poor choices with our family's money. He's also been lying to us about where he's been and what he's been doing. But I want you both to know that our home, your college funds, and our family's security are completely safe." "Are you getting divorced?" Isabella asked quietly. "I think that's very likely, honey. But unlike some families going through divorce, we won't be losing our home or struggling financially. Your father never legally owned this house, and all of our important assets are protected." What I didn't tell them was that their father had been planning to steal their inheritance, jeopardize their home, and potentially have their mother declared mentally incompetent. Some truths could wait until they were older. As we talked, my phone rang with Marcus's number. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message on speaker after the kids went to their rooms. "Elena, we need to talk when I get home tomorrow. I think there's been some misunderstanding about our finances, and I want to clear things up. I love you, and I'm committed to fixing whatever problems we're having." I deleted the message and smiled. Marcus still thought this was a conversation he could control, a situation he could manipulate with charm and explanations. He had no idea that while he'd been planning my downfall, I'd been building an impenetrable fortress around everything that mattered. And tomorrow, when he walked through the door of the house he thought he could steal, he was going to discover exactly how much trouble a forensic accountant can cause when you try to steal her life. Before I tell you exactly what happened when Marcus came home from his romantic weekend, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to explain a parent's betrayal to your children? Drop a comment about how you'd handle this situation, and make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is going to show you exactly why preparation and documentation can turn any victim into the person holding all the power. Sunday. Morning arrived with an unusual quiet in our house. Isabella was at an overnight volleyball camp. Cameron was spending the weekend at his friend Tyler's house, and I had the entire day to prepare for what would either be the most important conversation of my marriage or the first step in ending it completely. I started by transforming our dining room into what I privately called my war room. The mahogany table that had hosted so many family dinners, holiday celebrations, and homework sessions became the staging area for 18 years of meticulous documentation. I spread out bank statements, property records, insurance policies, and legal documents in chronological order, creating a timeline that told the story of Marcus's systematic betrayal. The centerpiece of my display was a large whiteboard I'd borrowed from Cameron's room, where I'd mapped out the financial fraud using the same techniques I employed for my professional cases. Red lines connected Marcus's affair timeline to suspicious withdrawals. Blue arrows tracked money flowing from our accounts to Vivien's business. Green highlights marked every lie Marcus had told about his whereabouts, cross-referenced with actual spending locations and times. Looking at the visual representation, even I was shocked by the scope of his deception. This wasn't the impulsive behavior of a man having a midlife crisis. This was the calculated execution of a long-term plan to transfer our family's wealth to fund his new relationship. My laptop displayed 3 separate spreadsheets I'd created over the weekend. The first tracked every suspicious transaction over the past 8 months, totaling $127,000 in diverted funds. The second analyzed our household expenses, proving that Marcus's client entertainment and business development costs had increased by 340% since hiring Vivien. The third projected the financial damage if Marcus had succeeded in his second mortgage scheme. Our family would have been $460,000 deeper in debt while he and Vivien enjoyed the proceeds. Around noon, I received a call from Detective Santos with an update that made my preparation even more critical. "Elena, we've been investigating Vivien Dubois' business operations, and what we found is very interesting." Maria's voice carried a note of satisfaction. "VD Designs LLC isn't just receiving money from Marcus. We've identified at least 3 other married men who've been making substantial payments to her company over the past 2 years. You're saying this is a pattern?" It appears Vivien has been running a sophisticated operation targeting married men in professional fields. She offers interior design services, begins affairs, then gradually extracts money through various business arrangements. The amounts suggest she's been systematically defrauding multiple families. The information hit me like a revelation. Marcus wasn't just cheating on me. He was the victim of a professional con artist who had targeted him specifically for his assets. But that realization didn't diminish his culpability. It actually made his betrayal worse. He'd been so eager to fund his affair that he'd fallen prey to someone who was clearly manipulating him. "Maria, does this change anything about the charges against Marcus?" "Actually, it strengthens your case. If we can prove Vivien deliberately targeted married men for financial fraud, Marcus becomes both a co-conspirator and a victim. But his attempts to steal your property equity and question your mental competency remain serious crimes regardless of Vivien's broader operation." After ending the call, I added this new information to my documentation. Marcus hadn't just been betraying our family. He'd been financing a criminal enterprise that was systematically destroying other marriages and families. The money he'd stolen from our children's future had been funding Vivien's con game against other vulnerable men. 2 p.m. I had completed what I considered the most comprehensive financial fraud case file of my career. Every transaction was documented, every lie was cross-referenced with evidence, and every legal protection I'd established was clearly explained with supporting paperwork. But the most important document was one I'd spent hours crafting. A detailed letter to Marcus that laid out exactly what I knew, what evidence I possessed, and what would happen next, depending on his choices. I wasn't interested in dramatic confrontations or emotional scenes. This was a business transaction now, and I was going to treat it with the same professional precision I brought to my forensic accounting cases. The letter began, "Marcus, by the time you read this, you will have returned from your weekend in Napa Valley with Vivien Dubois. You spent approximately $4,200 of our family's money on that trip, money that was supposed to pay our mortgage and secure our children's future. What you don't know is that I have documented every dollar you've stolen, every lie you've told, and every attempt you've made to defraud our family. I went on to detail the evidence I'd gathered, the legal protections that had been activated, and the criminal investigation that was now underway. But most importantly, I explained the choice he would face: complete cooperation and honesty, or full prosecution under multiple felony charges. You attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal our home equity, I wrote. You systematically diverted money meant for our children's security to fund an affair with a woman who has been running similar cons on at least 3 other families. You lied to our attorney, our banker, our children, and me for months while planning the destruction of everything we built together. But Marcus, you made one critical mistake. You assumed that because I trusted you, I was naive. You confused my love with weakness and my financial management with ignorance. What you never understood is that I am a professional fraud investigator, and I have been documenting and protecting our assets since long before we were married. The letter concluded with a simple ultimatum. When you walk through the door of the house you tried to steal, you have one choice. You can sit down with me and provide complete honesty about everything you've done, agree to make full restitution, and cooperate with the authorities investigating Vivien's criminal enterprise. Or you can continue lying, in which case I will proceed with criminal charges that will result in your arrest, imprisonment, and financial ruin. Either way, your affair is over, our marriage is over, and you will never again have access to our family's money or property. The only question is whether you leave this situation with any dignity intact or whether you lose everything, including your freedom. As the afternoon progressed, I made final preparations for Marcus's return. I contacted James Whitfield to confirm that emergency property protections had been filed and approved. I spoke with Sandra Chen from my insurance company to verify that my claim was being processed and that legal fee coverage was already active. I checked with Maria Santos to ensure that detective units were available if Marcus became threatening or refused to cooperate. By 6 p.m., everything was ready. The dining room looked like a professional investigator's office, complete with evidence boards, financial analysis, and legal documentation. The letter I'd written to Marcus sat in a sealed envelope on his place at the table, with his name written. In my careful handwriting, I changed into my most professional outfit, a navy blue suit I typically wore for court appearances when testifying as an expert witness. I wanted Marcus to see me not as his betrayed wife, but as the forensic accountant who had just dismantled his life with the same precision I brought to destroying financial criminals in my professional work. At 7:30 p.m., I heard Marcus's car in our driveway. Through the window, I watched him sit in his BMW for several minutes, apparently making a phone call. Probably to Vivien, I thought, reporting on his successful weekend while planning their next steps. He had no idea that while he'd been playing house in Napa Valley, I'd been systematically destroying every aspect of the life he thought he could steal from me. As his key turned in the front door, I took a deep breath and prepared to show Marcus the difference between someone who has access to your life and someone who actually controls it. The next hour would determine whether he chose cooperation or complete destruction. Either way, I was ready. Marcus walked through our front door with the casual confidence of a man who believed he was still in control of his double life. He was tan from his Napa Valley weekend, wearing an expensive polo shirt I'd never seen before, and carrying a small gift bag that probably contained some token meant to assuage his guilt about his latest business trip. "Elena?" he called out, his voice carrying that artificially cheerful tone he'd been using for months. "I'm home. Traffic from the wine country was terrible, but the Henderson Project meetings went really well." I remained seated at the dining room table, my hands folded calmly in front of the envelope containing his ultimatum. "I'm in here, Marcus. We need to talk." He appeared in the doorway and froze. His eyes took in the transformed dining room, the evidence boards, the financial documents spread across our table, the laptop displaying his fraud timeline, and me sitting in the center of it all like a prosecutor presenting a case. Elena, what is all this? He tried to maintain his confident demeanor, but I could see the color draining from his face as he recognized bank statements and property documents. Please sit down, Marcus. We have a lot to discuss. He approached the table cautiously, his gift bag forgotten in his hand. As he sat down, his eyes scanned the evidence I'd carefully arranged. I watched his expression change as he realized the scope of what I'd uncovered, from confusion to concern to barely concealed panic. Before we begin, I said, my voice steady and professional, I want you to understand that this conversation is being recorded for legal purposes. I gestured to the digital recorder I'd placed prominently on the table. Detective Maria Santos and Attorney James Whitfield have both advised me to document everything you say from this point forward. Legal purposes? Elena, what are you talking about? Why are there police involved in our personal business? I slid the sealed envelope across the table. Everything you need to know is in this letter. Read it carefully, because the choices you make in the next few minutes will determine whether you spend the next several years in prison or whether you have any chance of maintaining a relationship with Isabella and Cameron. Marcus's hands trembled, slightly as he opened the envelope. I watched his face as he read, seeing the exact moment when the full scope of his exposure hit him. His confident facade crumbled completely as he reached the sections detailing his attempts to question my mental competency and access our home equity. Elena, I can explain. No, I interrupted firmly. You're going to listen first. Then you're going to answer questions. Then, if you're smart, you're going to tell me the complete truth about everything you've done. I stood and moved to the evidence board, pointing to the timeline I'd created. 8 months ago, you hired Vivien Dubois for what you claimed was an office redesign project. Within 2 weeks, your spending patterns changed dramatically. Let's start there. Marcus stared at the board, seeing his betrayal mapped out in clinical detail. When did you figure this out? I'm a forensic accountant, Marcus. This is what I do for a living. Did you really think you could defraud someone who investigates financial fraud professionally? I moved to the laptop and turned the screen toward him. Every transaction you thought you were hiding is documented here. Every lie you told is cross-referenced with evidence proving it was false. I clicked through the spreadsheets, showing him the mounting evidence. The Bellacourt jewelry charge for $3,400 on March 15th. The same day you told me you were working late on the Riverside project. The Le Bernardin restaurant charges on evenings when you claim to be at client meetings. The wire transfers to VD Designs LLC that total $18,000 over 6 months. Elena, please, let me explain about Vivien. Vivien Dubois is currently under investigation by the Financial Crimes Unit for operating a systematic fraud scheme targeting married men. I said calmly. You're not her only victim, Marcus. She's been running this same con on at least 3 other families. The woman you've been funding your affair with is a professional criminal. The information hit Marcus like a physical blow. He slumped in his chair, the gift bag falling to the floor. That's impossible. Vivien loves me. We're planning a future together. The future you were planning was built on money stolen from our children's college funds and our family's security. But here's what makes your situation particularly serious, Marcus. I moved to another section of the evidence board. You didn't just have an affair and steal money, you attempted to defraud me out of our home. I pointed to the documentation from James Whitfield. 3 weeks ago, you tried to arrange a second mortgage on our property without my knowledge. You asked our attorney about having me declared mentally incompetent, so you could gain control of assets that have never legally belonged to you. Marcus's face went completely white. Elena, I never meant for it to go that far. I was just exploring options. Options for what? Stealing $460,000 in equity from a house that belongs entirely to me? Options for having your wife declared insane, so you could fund your girlfriend's criminal enterprise? My voice remained level, but I could feel the controlled fury behind every word. I returned to my seat and opened another folder. Here's what you apparently never understood, Marcus. This house, this property, these assets, they were never yours to steal. Every major financial decision we've made as a couple has been protected by legal structures you never bothered to learn about. I spread out the property deed, the trust documents, and the power of attorney agreements. You signed these papers years ago without reading them. You gave me authority over all major asset decisions. You agreed to ownership structures that protected our family's wealth from exactly the kind of fraud you've been attempting. Marcus stared at the documents, seeing his signature on agreements that had effectively prevented him from stealing what he thought was his to take. But we're married. I assumed. You assumed wrong. You assumed that because I managed our finances quietly and efficiently, I was naive about protecting those finances. You confused my trust with weakness and my love with stupidity. Leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly. Here's your situation, Marcus. You have committed multiple felonies: mortgage fraud, wire fraud, theft by deception, and attempted financial abuse. The evidence is overwhelming, the documentation is complete, and law enforcement is ready to proceed with charges. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want the truth. All of it. I want to know exactly how much money you've stolen, where it went, and what promises Vivien made to convince you to destroy our family. I want complete cooperation with the investigation into her criminal enterprise. And I want you to understand that your choices in this room, right now, will determine whether you have any relationship with your children in the future. Marcus looked around the room, at the evidence of his betrayal, at the wife he'd tried to defraud, at the life he'd systematically destroyed for a woman who had been manipulating him from the beginning. If I tell you everything, he said finally, what happens to me? That depends on what everything includes and how cooperative you choose to be. But Marcus, your affair is over, our marriage is over, and you will never again have access to our family's money or property. The only question is whether you leave this situation with any dignity intact. I gestured to the recorder. Start with Vivien. When did the affair begin? What did she promise you? And how much of our money have you given her? Marcus took a shaky breath and began to speak. What came next would either be the beginning of his cooperation or the final evidence I needed to destroy him completely. Either way, I was ready. The man who had walked through our door thinking he was still manipulating his naive wife was about to discover that forensic accountants don't just investigate financial crimes, we solve them. Marcus's confession lasted 47 minutes, and with each revelation, I realized how much worse his betrayal had been than even my thorough investigation had uncovered. But it was the phone call that came halfway through his admission that transformed this from a case of marital fraud into something far more significant. The affair started in October, Marcus was saying, his voice hollow as he stared at the evidence spread before him. Vivien said she'd been watching my work, that she was impressed by my architectural vision. She made me feel important, successful in ways I hadn't felt in years. As he spoke, I took notes, cross-referencing his timeline with my financial analysis. His story confirmed what I'd suspected. Vivien had targeted him specifically after researching his firm's client list and identifying him as someone with access to significant assets through marriage. She told me she was planning to start her own high-end design firm, that she needed an architect partner who understood luxury clients. She said we could build something amazing together, professionally and personally. How much money did you give her, Marcus? I thought it was investing in our future. The wire transfers to VD Designs. That was supposed to be seed money for our partnership. The jewelry, the dinners, the trips. I thought I was courting a business partner as much as someone I was falling in love with. My phone rang, displaying Detective Santos's number. I gestured for Marcus to continue while I answered. Elena, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a development you need to know about immediately. Maria's voice carried an urgency that made me pay attention. Can you put me on speaker? This affects Marcus directly. I looked at Marcus, who nodded reluctantly. You're on speaker, Maria. Marcus is here providing his full confession. Good, because Marcus, you need to hear this. We arrested Vivien Du Bois an hour ago at her apartment in downtown Millbrook. When we searched her residence, we found evidence of a fraud operation much larger than we initially suspected. Marcus looked stunned. You arrested Vivien? But she's at her sister's house in Sacramento for a family emergency. Marcus, Maria continued, there is no sister in Sacramento. Vivien has been operating this fraud from a luxury apartment, paid for by money, stolen from at least 7 different families, including yours. We found detailed files on each of her targets, including a comprehensive dossier on your family's financial situation dating back 18 months. The blood drained from Marcus's face. 18 months? But I only met her 8 months ago. She'd been researching you long before you met. We found documents showing she'd been tracking your wife's forensic accounting business, your architectural contracts, even your children's school schedules. The meeting at your office wasn't coincidental. It was the culmination of months of planning. I felt a chill run down my spine. Maria, what kind of information did she have about our family? Property records, income tax returns somehow obtained illegally, credit reports, even surveillance photos of your home and daily routines. Elena, this woman had been planning to target your family with the same precision you use in your fraud investigations. Marcus slumped in his chair. She knew about Elena's work, about our house, our assets? Marcus, she knew everything. We found emails between Vivien and someone called the coordinator, we believe it's the head of this fraud ring, discussing your family as a high-value target with substantial extractable assets and an emotionally vulnerable primary mark. The E words hit Marcus like physical blows. He'd thought he was having an affair with someone who loved him. Instead, he'd been the carefully selected victim of a criminal enterprise that had studied our family like a case file. There's more, Maria continued. We also found evidence that Vivien was planning to escalate her operation significantly. There were documents outlining a scheme to manipulate Marcus into divorcing you, gaining half of what they believed were joint assets, then disappearing with the money. But the assets aren't joint, I said, understanding the flaw in their plan. The house, the major investments, they're all protected in my name only. Exactly. Which is why we found a second set of plans involving what they called incapacity. Protocols. Elena, they were planning to have you declared mentally incompetent through falsified medical records and bought-off psychiatric evaluations. The room seemed to spin around me. These criminals hadn't just been stealing our money. They'd been planning to destroy my reputation, my autonomy, and my relationship with my children to access assets they could never legally touch. How far did this conspiracy go? I asked, my voice barely steady. We're still investigating, but the preliminary evidence suggests a network operating in at least 4 states, targeting successful professional couples where one spouse has substantial protected assets. You weren't their first victim, and you wouldn't have been their last. Marcus spoke up, his voice broken. Maria, I need to know, was any of it real? Did Vivien have any genuine feelings for me? Or was I just a complete fool? Marcus, I'm sorry, but we found recordings of phone conversations where Vivien described you as pathetically easy to manipulate and joked about your desperate need for validation. She was explicitly instructed to target your insecurities, about your marriage and your professional achievements. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus put his head in his hands, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a moment of genuine sympathy for him. Yes, he had betrayed our family and stolen our money, but he had also been the victim of a sophisticated criminal operation designed to exploit his vulnerabilities. There's one more thing, Maria added. When we arrested Vivien, I tried to negotiate by offering information about Marcus's willing participation in the fraud. She had been secretly recording your conversations, Marcus, planning to use them as evidence against you if she was ever caught. She was recording me? Conversations about accessing your house equity, discussions about Elena's supposed mental health issues, even intimate moments. She was building a case to frame you as the mastermind while positioning herself as a manipulated victim. I looked at Marcus with a mixture of anger and pity. He had betrayed our family, but he had also been completely outmaneuvered by criminals who were far more sophisticated than either of us had realized. Maria, I said, what does this mean for our situation? It means Marcus's cooperation in bringing down this entire network could significantly impact his legal situation. We need information about every conversation he had with Vivien, every person she introduced him to, every detail about how this operation worked. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes red with exhaustion and humiliation. Elena, I know I have no right to ask this, but I want to help bring these people down, not just for me, but because of what they were planning to do to you and the kids. I studied his face, trying to determine if this was genuine remorse or another manipulation. But the evidence was clear. Marcus had been both perpetrator and victim, and his cooperation could help prevent other families from experiencing what we'd gone through. Maria, what kind of cooperation are we talking about? Full disclosure of all interactions with Vivien and her associates, participation in controlled communications to gather additional evidence, and testimony against the entire network when we go to trial. I made a decision that surprised even me. Marcus, I want you to cooperate fully with the investigation. Not because I forgive what you did to our family, but because other people's children and homes are at risk. Does this change anything about our situation? Marcus asked quietly. It changes the scope of the criminal investigation, and it might affect your sentencing, I replied honestly. But it doesn't change the fact that our marriage is over, that you will never have access to our family's assets again, and that you'll need to rebuild your relationship with Isabella and Cameron from nothing. As Maria ended the call and Marcus prepared to continue his full confession, I realized that what had started as my personal fight for justice had become something much larger. We were now part of bringing down a criminal network that had been systematically destroying families across multiple states. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just protecting yourself. It's making sure the people who tried to destroy you can never hurt anyone else. 3 weeks after that confrontation in our dining room, I stood in federal court watching as the largest spousal fraud prosecution in state history unfolded. Marcus, wearing an orange jumpsuit that matched his now permanent tan from what I'd learned was the last vacation he'd ever take on stolen money, was providing testimony that would dismantle a criminal network spanning 4 states and affecting dozens of families. The courtroom was packed with victims and their families. Sarah and David Chen from Portland, whose marriage had been destroyed when David fell prey to an associate of Vivien's operation. Jennifer Martinez from Phoenix, who'd lost her home when her husband was manipulated into a similar equity theft scheme. Michael and Karen Thompson from Denver, who'd nearly lost their children's college funds to what they thought was Michael's midlife crisis, but was actually a coordinated fraud targeting his tech company stock options. U.S. Attorney Rebecca Fernandez stood before the jury with a presentation that looked remarkably similar to the evidence boards I'd created in our dining room. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing is not a series of unrelated marital problems or individual cases of infidelity. What you're seeing is the systematic operation of a criminal enterprise that weaponized human emotion to steal millions of dollars from American families. On the prosecution table sat 847 pages of evidence, financial records, surveillance reports, recorded conversations, and email communications that detailed how this network identified targets, exploited their vulnerabilities, and extracted maximum value before discarding them. My own financial analysis had become Exhibit A in the federal case, and I'd been designated as the prosecution's lead expert witness. Dr. Elena Castellano, Attorney Fernandez called, and I approached the witness stand with the same professional confidence I'd brought to hundreds of fraud cases, except this time I was testifying about crimes committed against my own family. Dr. Castellano, can you explain to the jury how your forensic accounting expertise helped uncover this criminal network? When I discovered my husband's financial irregularities, I applied the same investigative techniques I use in my professional fraud cases, I explained, looking directly at the jury. What I found wasn't the pattern of typical marital financial abuse. It was the signature of organized criminal activity. I walked the jury through my analysis, showing how the timing of financial transfers, the methods of asset extraction, and the systematic approach to manipulating my husband all indicated professional-level fraud rather than personal betrayal. The defendants didn't just steal money, I continued. They conducted detailed surveillance of our family, illegally obtained our private financial records, and developed psychological profiles to determine the most effective way to manipulate my husband's insecurities and extract our assets. In the defendant's section, Vivien Dubois sat beside her attorney, no longer the glamorous interior designer who had charmed my husband. Without the expensive clothes purchased with stolen money and the confident demeanor funded by criminal success, she looked like what she actually was, a woman facing 23 years in federal prison. Dr. Castellano, the defense attorney asked during cross-examination, isn't it true that your husband willingly participated in these financial transfers? That he made conscious choices to redirect family money? My husband was the victim of a sophisticated psychological manipulation designed specifically to exploit his emotional vulnerabilities, I replied firmly. The defendants researched our marriage for 18 months, identifying the precise tactics that would be most effective in convincing him to betray his family's trust. But he still chose to steal from your children's college funds, didn't he? I met the attorney's eyes steadily. He was manipulated into believing he was investing in a legitimate business partnership with someone who claimed to love him. The defendants recorded these private conversations specifically to use against him later, demonstrating that his victimization was always part of their plan. The defense attorney tried a different approach. Mrs. Castellano, you've profited significantly from this situation, haven't you? Your insurance claim resulted in a substantial payout, and your forensic accounting business has received considerable publicity. I protected my family's assets through legal structures I established years before this fraud occurred, I answered calmly. The insurance policy I held was specifically designed to protect against spousal financial fraud. And yes, my business has grown, because other families now understand they need professional help to protect themselves from exactly this type of criminal enterprise. When Detective Maria Santos took the stand, she detailed the scope of the Maing investigation that had grown from my initial complaint. Operation Family Fortune ultimately identified 47 victims across 4 states, with total financial damages exceeding $12.8 million. The Castellano case became our model for understanding how this network operated. She explained how my documentation had provided the template for investigating other victims. Dr. Castellano's forensic analysis was so thorough that we were able to identify similar patterns in other cases. Her professional expertise essentially cracked the code on how this criminal network operated. Marcus's testimony came on the trial's final day. Facing the judge who would soon sentence him, he provided details about conversations with Vivien that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. She told me that Elena's forensic accounting background made our family a challenge case, Marcus I testified, his voice barely audible. She said that successfully stealing from someone who investigates financial fraud would prove the network could target anyone. What did she say about your wife specifically? The prosecutor asked. She called Elena the prize. She said that destroying a forensic accountant's family would send a message to other potential victims that no one was safe from their operations. As Marcus spoke, I felt a strange combination of vindication and sadness. The criminals hadn't just targeted our family randomly, They'd specifically chosen us because of my professional expertise, viewing my destruction as a trophy that would demonstrate their capabilities. Judge Harrison addressed the defendants. Before sentencing, "This court has rarely seen such a calculated and cruel exploitation of human emotion for financial gain. You didn't just steal money. You systematically destroyed families, traumatized children, and weaponized love itself for criminal profit." Vivien Dubois received 23 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay $4.2 million in restitution. Her associate Marcus Chen, no relation to our family, received 18 years. The network coordinator, identified as Robert Kane, received 31 years for orchestrating the entire operation. Marcus, for his cooperation in bringing down the network, received 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised probation, and was ordered to pay $127,000 in restitution to our family, money that would go directly into Isabella and Cameron's college funds. As we left the courthouse, Attorney Fernandez approached me with an unexpected proposal. "Elena, the FBI's financial crimes division has been impressed with your work on this case. We'd like to discuss a consulting position helping us identify and investigate similar operations." The offer was tempting. Using my expertise to protect other families from what we'd experienced felt like meaningful work. But I had other priorities first. "I'm interested," I replied, "but my immediate focus is helping my children process what their father did, and rebuilding our family's sense of security." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around the victims' families. When they asked me for a statement, I thought about everything I'd learned over the past months. "These criminals succeeded partially because they underestimated their victims," I said into the cameras. "They assumed that love makes people naive, that trust makes them vulnerable. What they discovered is that preparation, documentation, and professional expertise can turn any victim into their worst nightmare." As we drove home, to the house that had always been mine, that was now truly secure, I realized that Marcus's betrayal had revealed something important: the legal protections I'd established years ago hadn't just saved our family's assets. They'd provided the foundation for bringing down a criminal enterprise that had been destroying families across the country. Sometimes the best defense isn't just protecting yourself, it's making sure the people who tried to destroy you never get the chance to hurt anyone else. 6 months after the federal sentencing, I stood in the kitchen of our Rosewood Drive home, the same kitchen where I'd received that devastating phone call about our overdue mortgage, watching Isabella and Cameron help me prepare dinner for 12 guests. Tonight, we were hosting the first annual Financial Protection Workshop for families who'd reached out after seeing our story in the media. The transformation in our home was remarkable, not just physically, but emotionally. Gone were the expensive, decorative pieces Marcus had purchased to impress visitors he was trying to manipulate. In their place were family photos, Isabella's volleyball trophies, Cameron's science fair awards, and artwork from the children we'd met through the victim support network. "Mom, Mrs. Chen is here with her daughter," Isabella announced, opening the door for Sarah Chen and her 16-year-old daughter, Amy. Sarah had become one of our closest friends through the support group, bonding over the shared experience of watching our husbands fall prey to the same criminal network. "Elena, thank you so much for hosting this," Sarah said, embracing me warmly. "Amy's been working on her financial literacy project for school, and hearing from you directly will make all the difference." Our dinner table, which had once been the site of Marcus's lies about client dinners and late meetings, now hosted monthly gatherings for families rebuilding after financial betrayal. Tonight's group included the Martinez family from Phoenix, who'd driven 8 hours to attend, the Thompsons from Denver, who'd become advocates for stronger spousal fraud legislation, and 3 new families who'd discovered similar patterns in their own marriages. "Before we eat," I announced to the assembled group, "I want to share some news that I think will inspire all of you." I pulled out a letter I'd received that morning from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The consulting work we've been doing together has led to the identification of 14 additional criminal networks operating similar spousal fraud schemes. Because of the template we developed from our cases, law enforcement has prevented an estimated $47 million in additional fraud. The room erupted in applause, but I wasn't finished. More importantly, the legislative advocacy work that Jennifer Martinez has been leading has resulted in new federal protections for spousal fraud victims. Starting next year, banks will be required to flag unusual joint account activity and provide additional verification for large asset transfers between spouses. Jennifer beamed from across the table. Elena's documentation methods are now being taught in law enforcement academies. Across the country, we're literally changing how these crimes are investigated. As we shared dinner, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The consulting contract with the FBI had evolved into a full-time position as senior forensic consultant for domestic financial crimes. My expertise, once used primarily for corporate fraud cases, now focused on protecting families from the type of systematic abuse we'd experienced. The house that Marcus had tried to steal had become a sanctuary for other victims and their children. Isabella and Cameron, rather than being traumatized by their father's betrayal, had developed a sophisticated understanding of financial protection that would serve them well throughout their lives. "Mom," Cameron said as we cleared dishes, "I've been thinking about my college major. I want to study forensic accounting like you, but specializing in cybersecurity for financial crimes." Isabella nodded. "And I want to focus on family law, maybe help other kids whose parents go through what we did." Their resilience and purpose amazed me daily. Instead of viewing their father's betrayal as a source of shame, they'd embraced it as motivation to protect other families. The college funds that Marcus had tried to steal were now fully restored and growing, supplemented by the restitution payments and my increased consulting income. Later that evening, after our guests had departed, I received a video call from Detective Maria Santos, who was now heading the FBI's new Domestic Financial Crimes Task Force. "Elena, I wanted to update you on the Kane Network prosecution appeals," Maria reported. All 3 defendants had their appeals denied. Vivien will serve her full 23-year sentence, and Robert Kane's 31-year sentence was actually increased to 35 years after additional evidence was discovered. "What about the other networks we've identified?" 14 operations shut down, 127 arrests made, and over $200 million in stolen assets recovered for victims. The Castellano Protocol, she smiled at the name they'd given to my investigative methodology, has become the standard for these investigations. After ending the call, I walked through our home, thinking about the journey from that devastating morning when I discovered our accounts were empty to this evening's celebration of families rebuilding stronger than before. In the home office, where I'd once planned Marcus's confrontation, I now maintained files on 200-plus families we'd helped through the Victim Support Network. The insurance payout from my spousal fraud policy had been donated to establish the Family Financial Protection Foundation, which provided legal assistance and investigative support to victims who couldn't afford professional help. My phone buzzed, with a text from Marcus, sent from the federal facility where he was serving his sentence. Saw the news story about the legislation passing. I'm proud that something good came from the terrible things I did. Isabella and Cameron are lucky to have you as their mother. I hope someday I can earn a small place in their lives again. I'd been receiving these messages monthly since his incarceration began. Each one showed genuine remorse and progress in the therapy programs he was attending. Whether he would ever rebuild a relationship with his children remained their choice to make when they were ready. But I no longer felt anger toward him, only sadness for the man who'd allowed criminals to manipulate him into nearly destroying everything we'd built. The financial protections that had saved our family were now being implemented by thousands of others. The premarital trust structures, the single-name property ownership, the spousal fraud insurance, and the meticulous documentation practices had become a standard template for protecting family assets. The next morning brought an email that perfectly captured how our story was continuing to impact others. Dr. Castellano, my name is Patricia Williams, and I'm a 34-year-old teacher from Atlanta. After reading about your case, I discovered that my husband has been systematically stealing from our joint accounts to fund what I now realize is likely an affair. Using your documentation methods, I've gathered evidence that he's taken $23,000 over 4 months. Because of your advocacy for spousal fraud legislation, my bank flagged the unusual activity and helped me freeze the accounts before more damage was done. I wanted you to know that your courage in sharing your story saved my family's future. I forwarded Patricia's email to our support network and began preparing another case consultation. Each family we helped reinforced the lesson that had emerged. From our own experience, preparation, documentation, and professional expertise could transform any victim into someone holding all the power. As I worked, Isabella returned from school with news that her senior economics project on family financial protection had been selected for the state competition. Cameron announced that his science fair project on digital fraud detection algorithms had won first place in the regional competition. Our children weren't just surviving their father's betrayal. They were using the experience to build expertise that would protect other families in the future. That evening, as I tucked Cameron into bed, he asked the question that had become our family motto. "Mom, do you think Dad would have succeeded in stealing our house if you hadn't prepared so well?" "No, sweetheart," I replied. The same answer I'd given dozens of times. The legal protections we had in place made it impossible for anyone to steal what belonged to our family. That's why preparation matters so much. And that's why other families need to prepare too? Exactly. Sometimes the best way to heal from someone's betrayal is to make sure it never happens to anyone else. As I turned off his light, I reflected on the unexpected journey from personal betrayal to professional mission. Marcus had tried to steal our house, our money, and our security. Instead, his betrayal had revealed the power of preparation and launched a career protecting thousands of families from similar crimes. The house he'd attempted to fraudulently mortgage was now the headquarters for a national movement in family financial protection. The woman he'd tried to have declared mentally incompetent was now training FBI agents in forensic financial investigation. Sometimes betrayal doesn't destroy you. It reveals exactly how strong you've been all along. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear about it in the comments. Have you ever discovered that your careful planning saved you from someone else's poor decisions? Share your experience below, and make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's story is about a woman who discovered her business partner was embezzling funds and the brilliant way she turned the tables using skills nobody knew she had. Where? Are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments, and remember, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something so strong that no one can ever tear it down again. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked. Just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.